Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my new video. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Huawei. And before I do, don't forget to like, share, and try and comment on the comment section. It really helps the algorithm, even if you say hi, and it makes all the difference. So let's go. So I saw this article here in SCMP, how Huawei silicon strategy defies US sanctions to advance China's AI ambitions. So before I talk about this, I want to talk about what Trump did in his first term. I think a lot of you have good memories. And I just want to remind you, in Trump's first term, he placed hell of a lot of sanctions on China. And he literally kicked Huawei out of America and he placed sanctions on Huawei. No Western company, including TSMC, was allowed to sell any latest chips to Huawei. They weren't allowed to have any latest semiconductors. All all Trump was trying to do was destroy Huawei at the time. He was totally trying to destroy that company. And that was his goal. Unfortunately, it didn't work. And Trump even forced Boris Johnson to kick out Huawei from UK. And he also forced a lot of companies around the world to kick out Huawei, including Australia, a number of countries from the EU, even a couple of countries from South America as well. And let's not forget, its big states as well, like Japan, South Korea, and many others. So there was a global war, not just against Chinese tech companies, but also against China as well. Lots of Chinese companies were placed on a blacklist, meaning, they weren't allowed to buy high-end chips. Trump also blocked China from buying high-end machines from like ASML, high-end lithography machine, EUV machines, even DUV machines as well. Um, and this caused huge issues in China at the time. And back then, Trump had leverage, basically. He had leverage and he used it fully. This policy was carried on by Biden as well. And yeah, so their goal was to destroy China's tech industry, destroy China's economy, and that's what they thought that was going to happen. They thought by blocking all these chips to China, China's economy would collapse. However, they didn't expect China to fight back so hard. China fought back in many areas, basically. They started from the ground up. They started teaching students semiconductors at universities. They were giving grants to students that wanted to learn to be chip engineers, chip designers. So a lot of universities started doing semiconductor courses. So they wanted to build up a new generation of Chinese to basically push Chinese semiconductor to the next century, skills to the next century. So they pushed a lot of universities to teach that. They gave a lot of companies grants that could, you know, progress the technology of semiconductors. They gave a lot of grants and money to SMIC, for example. SMIC was not a big player back then. Back then, they were quite a few generations behind of TSMC, and they weren't making much money at the time as well. So the Chinese government decided to give them a lot of money. They poured in a lot of money into research and development. Huawei also did the same as well. They put a lot of money into research and development themselves. They bought a lot of startup companies, and and a lot of companies were even trying to figure out how to build EUV machines and the DUV machines. I believe a couple of companies have already built DUV machines like SMEE and a few others as well. These are still going through testing, and I believe they are within reach, developing an EUV machine over the next few years as well. So this is a long-term project, guys. It's not something that can happen overnight. China's put a lot of money and effort and research and skills into building up their semiconductor industry. They also brought in a lot of skills from abroad, like from TSMC, from Japan, and also ASML. They brought a lot of skills, kind of paying very high salaries, and to teach the next generation how to do things as well. Um, they, China still is the world leader in packaging. So, they are still the best at packaging. So China is still leading that, in terms of skills. But what they were lacking in was chip design. Most of the chip design was from American design companies and British design companies like ARM, for example. And China and Huawei was using ARM software to design their chips. And with the restrictions that, caused them big issue as well. And yeah, so there was a lot of issues at the time. So China's basically building everything from ground up, from design softwares. They are using basically PA risks, um, open source um, software to design a brand new designing software. They are teaching a brand new generation and building up a new generation of semiconductor experts. And also, they have some money pouring into companies to build semiconductor machines and chips. And you can see the fruits of the labor now. So many companies are now well established, making chips, making GPU chips, servers, and everything. And you can see a lot of companies coming out of China who are leading the field when it comes to chip design and chips. So I don't think China or Huawei have got very far to go. Huawei itself, they decided to diversify. When Trump puts his sanctions on Huawei at the time, Huawei was in deep trouble. So they had to sell their phone company, Honor, and they had to sell that to kind of raise some money. And with that money, they basically put that into research and development. Their phones, for a number of years, suffered a lot. Their main phones, like the Mate phones and Huawei phones, the main ones. So they had to sell them for a very expensive price because a lot of the chips they bought before the sanctions were in place. So they bought a huge supply of chips, and those obviously were limited. So they had to sell these phones at a high price. So whoever bought these phones in China helped Huawei and helped China in general to where it is today. So those people need very good gratitude because it wasn't about buying the phones, it was about, building the future and helping the Chinese industry. And and that's what's happened basically. So Huawei was struggling for a few years. So they decided they needed to branch out and open up new ventures. So they went into, you know, EV cars. They went into building data centers. They built their own database, for example, because back then Huawei was using Western products. So like they were using Oracle database, and Oracle was banned from working with Huawei. And so Huawei had to build the whole architecture from new. So they had to build their own database. They had to build their own operating system, which is Harmony OS, because Google decided to ban Huawei as well, and Microsoft decided to ban as well. So all Western products basically banned Huawei. So their goal was to destroy Huawei. That was Trump's goal. So Huawei built its own operating system. They built their own laptop. They built their own phones with local companies. They built their own e-business suite and software, their own data centers, and their own EVs, like you've seen, their own mining kind of sector as well. They have so many different branches. They are like the next Samsung, and as you know, Samsung in Korea, they do everything. They are the biggest company in Korea, and they pretty much do everything in Korea. They build everything from washing machines to X-ray machines to laptops, phones, anything you name it, Samsung is doing it. And this is Huawei, with what Huawei is doing in China. They're pretty much doing everything at the moment. And what Trump has basically created a monster in Huawei. Like there's a famous story of the Hydra. When he chopped one head off, two more grow in its place. So this is what Trump has done to Huawei. He tried to chop Huawei's head off, but unfortunately, not just two, but maybe 200 heads grew up and is causing more problems for Trump now. And Trump's policies throughout his histories of his leadership have all been failures. I mean, you can see his policies right now in his second term. All his trade policies have become failures. This is why they call Trump Taco. Trump always chickens out. His trade policies are failing. Every single policy he's put out has pretty much failed. There has been no successful thing that's happened in his premiership, in his second premiership as president of the United States. No successful, nothing. Not even Doge was successful. Nothing was successful. He hasn't even released any Epstein files or anything like that. He's pretty much done nothing. All he's done is break promises from his MAGA crew. Like he promised them he wouldn't start any wars. He's starting wars. He promised them he would keep the prices down. All the prices are going up with inflation because of what he's doing with his tariffs and many other things. So he's been a failure in his second term, and he's been a massive failure in his first term as well. In his first term, he's the one that caused all the inflation. If you look at the inflation results, inflation started to creep up because of Trump's first term. Because Trump increased inflation because he started a trade war with China. And that brought all the cost of goods up. He done ridiculous amounts of money printing during COVID, and that also brought inflation up. And he also reduced taxes for companies, especially for his friends, and that also brought inflation up. And they had to borrow money to make ends meet. So his first term was a disaster, and his second term is looking like a bigger disaster, unfortunately. His MAGA crew are all disappointed. So let's kind of talk about what's happening with Huawei with this article. I mean, this article, I'm not going to read the whole article, but basically they are saying that this has been a mistake. Um, Huawei has released a chip which is faster in terms of he outperforms NVIDIA's processors running DeepSeek's R1 model. You can see, and even NVIDIA are saying that all of these semiconductor restrictions on China are a mistake because it's really pushing China to work harder. It's becoming harder for Western companies to sell to China because Chinese companies are catching up, and now Chinese companies like Huawei are releasing chips which are faster than Western models, which means Western models are going to be priced out. And if the Western models are being priced out of China, then you are looking at hundreds of billions being lost in profit from China. Can I remind you that in Trump's first term, China was buying between 400 to 500 billion dollars worth of chips from America or American companies at the time because China did not really have a chip industry of its own, high-end chip anyway. So they were buying 400 or 500 billion worth of chips from American companies, American-friendly companies like TSMC and things like that. So a lot of money was going into American companies and into their pockets. And now, you know, since Trump has placed all these sanctions, now China is actually making a profit. Now they are selling around 100, 200 billion worth of chips on the export market. And so companies around the world are buying Chinese chips, which are cheaper, faster. And these are not high-end chips, by the way. These are low-end chips. On a, but China has been focusing on building up their low-end chip sector for a number of years now, and I think pretty soon they are going to take over the high-end chip sector as well. So they are catching up very fast, and Americans, and especially Trump, are seeing this. And you can from this article, Nvidia guy is saying they need to stop with all of these sanctions on China. Is not working. Nvidia has already lost around $8 billion from the H20 chip. And the H20 chip was a chip that they were selling to China, and it's a lower version of the high-end chip. And then when Trump comes along, he said, "Oh, we need to put licenses on H20 chips." And because of these licenses, Chinese companies did not buy these H20 chips, and Nvidia had to basically get rid of them. They are basically it's causing a big loss. And you can see here from this article, I've just highlighted it. I'm just going to read this part out for you. Huang assessments followed Nvidia's disclosure in April that US government now required a license to export its H20 chips to China. The company incurred a 4.5 billion charge in its first quarter ended April 27 owing to excess inventory and purchase obligations for H20. For the second quarter, Nvidia expects a 8 billion revenue loss from the H20 chips ban. So they're looking at 8 billion revenue loss because of this chip ban and licensing. And Huawei has already taken over. Huawei has already released its own chips to fight with the Nvidia chip, and the government is basically telling Chinese companies to start buying Chinese chips, especially from Huawei, because American companies are not reliable. You can buy an American chip one day, then Trump comes along and says, "Oh, you can't sell this to Chinese companies. Let's ban it." And you, as a Chinese company, what do? You just bought all of these American chips. The next day they ban it. So you're basically stuck as a company. You're just stuck with these chips that may or may not work. They won't have any support. So you just wasted a lot of money. So Chinese companies are now going to focus on buying Chinese chips, even though they are maybe one generation slower. This is it really doesn't matter because China has managed to catch up speeds in other ways. For example, with stacking, Huawei has been stacking, two or three chips together to have the same speed as the latest TSMC chip, for example. So China has found ways or workarounds to basically make their chips just as fast as the Western ones. And you can see not only a guy from Nvidia saying it, but so many people in the industry are talking about what a big mistake it is for these restrictions on China because it's just working against America. There's going to come a time when if every single company in China starts, using Chinese chips, then American businesses will be pushed out and they would lose hundreds of billions. And lots of the famous economists are saying that you got Jamie Dimon, you got the leader of what's it? I think it's his name's Sachs as well. David Sachs is saying it as well. And you can see from the deep seek moment when hundreds of billions were basically thrown out of the American stock market because of DeepSeek got released. Now Huawei's running DeepSeek's chips as well. And also wanted to also show you that a brand new chip is in development in Huawei, the new Kirin 930, excuse me, and that's going to come out in the next Mate 80 series as well. So that's probably come out by end of this year. So what else is there in this article? So I just wanted to kind of say, um, so it's also provided, like, I mean, Americans are absolutely shocked. They provided details of China's or Huawei's 910 AC AI processor for the first time. And the chip has a dual die architecture integrating two identical computing dies in a single package. These dies share 8 stacks of on-package memory and communicate via high bandwidth connection fabric, which enables rapid data transfer that is crucial for intensive AI workloads. And can I also remind you that Huawei was allowed to buy chips when they were banned, but they were only allowed to buy 4G chips. So everybody knows Huawei is a 5G company and their phones are 5G, but they were only allowed to buy 4G chips from America. And this was a huge, embarrassment. This is like humiliating for Huawei at the time. Huawei was a 5G tech company, but they were only allowed to buy 4G chips. I mean, this was a huge humiliation by the West. But Huawei is using 5G chips now, and now they are using their latest AI chips as well. And the West is absolutely having a meltdown because of it. And the funny thing was, I think it was last year or the year before when the trade secretary at the time, Redondo went to China and to talk about trade. And during her visit, Huawei released their brand new phone at the time, and it was all over the billboards and everything. And Redondo was one of the main people who was trying to block these chips from selling to China, and she was under shock. And Huawei basically scheduled the release based on her coming to China, and it was such a funny sight. So what else does it say? So you can see that when I was talking about stacking and clustering, Huawei and China have basically perfected this method to have chips just as fast as Western chips. So you kind of get the idea, guys. I mean, Huawei is very fast coming up, and America, even like some companies are even taking, basically taking over. They're having a better breakthrough, and and the more time it takes, the more faster China will catch up to the West and even outdo the West. It's been about how long has it been since Trump's trade war? It's been about, I think, 6, 7 years now. I think it's been since Trump started his trade war with China. And China always said this is a 10-year project. And within three more years, it's been 6, 7 years now. Within three more years, give it like 10 years from the start of Trump's trade war, China would be in such a better state. They would catch up. They would have their EUV machines up and running. They would have all their latest chips, GPUs, processors. They won't need Western companies anymore. And not only that, China would be developing these chips faster and cheaper, meaning meaning that other countries around the world will start buying Chinese chips, processors, GPUs, and they will price Western companies out the market. And one of the monopolies that Western companies had is the sanctions. So America and Trump and whoever comes along, if they decide to sanction a country, they sanction everything. That includes not allowed to buy the latest sanctioned chips. And so a lot of companies stay poor because they are not allowed to buy the latest chips. But now with China, they can start selling chips to Iran, all the sanctions countries who cannot buy chips from America. China can start selling them to Iran, to Venezuela, to Cuba, to Russia, whoever wants to buy it. There's no sanctions, and they will help these countries develop. And this is absolutely scaring the American companies and the American government, Trump. This is absolutely scaring the hell out of them. That they're going to lose all this control. They're going to lose the market, semiconductor market around the world. They're going to lose the hegemony. And semiconductor is probably the last hegemony America has. They have lost every other hegemony to China. There is nothing China can do which America can do better. So the only thing right now where America has a slight edge over China is semiconductors. I'm talking high-end semiconductors, by the way, especially with EUV technology and the latest chips without stacking and stuff. But China is very, very fast coming up. And once China takes that crown, it's over, guys. It's over for the tech industry in America. It's just going to be, there'll be no companies, even in EU, they'll start buying, tech semiconductors from China. And it's going to be bad news for TSMC as well, the puppet company working for America. It's going to be bad news for them. They have bought hundreds of $billions worth of really expensive chip making tools from ASML, and they're going to be branded useless because when China comes out with its own EUV machine, which is 10 times cheaper, you know, TSMC is going to be bankrupt pretty much. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say for now. And you can see this article. I'm not going to read the whole lot, but they're all basically saying what a big mistake it was for United States to do these chip sanctions on China. It hasn't worked out for them, and they need to cancel it fast because if they don't cancel it, they will be priced out in a few years, and all these Chinese companies are pretty much going to take over. It was better for China to buy these chips like it was 6, 7 years ago, where China didn't have its own industry. They were happy to buy chips from America, 400, 500 billion worth. But that ship has that ship has basically sailed. There's no turning back, and it's all their own fault. It's all Trump's fault. It's all the US government's fault. It's all Biden's fault. They're all to blame. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, guys. Take care for now, and I'll see you soon.